Hello and welcome to 707. Today we have Cheryl Parkinson on the show. She founded what we call the Living Room, a day facility for homeless women and children 23 years ago, this very moment. No? Not exactly today, but this year.
Not exactly. And I'm actually the executive director, not the founder. So
Okay.
don't want to take credit for that.
I'm not the founder, but I am the executive director. I just take credit for everything. That's the job,
right?
For
me. Yeah. Yes.
So let's talk about what the Living Room does. What is a day center for homeless women and children?
Yes, we're a day center for homeless women and children, and we are a place for women and children to go during the day, say when the emergency shelters are closed at night, or people who are living in their cars or living outside. They come in and we do a lot of different kinds of services. They come in for meals, we serve breakfast and lunch. We have counseling 4 days a week. We have phones and computers. We have a P.O. box, so if you're homeless and don't have an address, they can use the P.O. box. So basically women come in, it's a drop-in center. It's not something where you sign up and you have to be there certain days. So they drop in when they need things, if they need shampoo, deodorant, feminine hygiene products, meal, counseling. And that's basically what we do in our main program.
That's great, yeah.
We also have a mother and child program which focuses more on the parenting aspects of being homeless and a parent, and that can be a real challenge, as you can imagine. It's a challenge if you're not homeless, so it's really a challenge when you're homeless. And we have parenting classes, and we model positive parenting methods. So, a lot of the participants we see were raised in households where the form of discipline is hitting or yelling or locking up somewhere. So for a lot of these women, positive discipline is a completely foreign concept. So it takes a while for our staff and volunteers to model, this is how you can handle this situation. And that's a lot of what we do in that program.
So this is not meant to sound facetious, but the fact that you guys exist at all is indicative of the fact that there's a problem.
Yes.
Right? What's happening out there? How many people do you serve? Why do you have to exist right now?
Yeah, it would be great if it were true that people were ending homelessness. They've talked about that for quite a few years. And the good thing is they're thinking about it. It might not quite be there yet. There is a little progress, but Sonoma County has an estimated 5,000 homeless people. And that's a lot of people to be out on the streets. It's equivalent to the whole population of Katati just being out there. So there's still a lot of people. Housing is really expensive, and that's the bottom line here, is that there just isn't a place to go, even for those people who manage to work through the issues they have so that they can stay in housing, even if it's a room or an apartment. They don't have the money to do it.
I mean, is the solution to move out of Sonoma County?
Well, most people need some sort of support group, whether it's a social worker, family, something to really handle housing anywhere. I mean, it might be cheaper somewhere else, but there might not be the support they really need. You probably heard the concept housing first, where you try to get people into housing, but the other portion of that is social services to get somebody able to really handle the daily routines. It doesn't sound like much. Well, gosh, wouldn't it be easy to be housed as opposed to not being housed? But when you haven't budgeted and you have very little money, poverty is a huge piece of this.
Very complex issue, Yes. When I asked if the solution is to move out of Sonoma County, of course I was baiting you, because you shouldn't have to move out of Sonoma County. It's incredible what's happening with rents and home prices in general and that kind of thing. And I don't perceive it stopping anytime soon. Do you guys anticipate a change? And if not, how are you going to address it as the Living Room?
We don't see a quick change. We do see small steps where there's a lot more attention being paid to the problem by the city and the county, trying to figure out where they can use the money the best to be helpful. You see where they converted a motel recently to some homeless housing. That's a step forward. But really, we need the affordable housing piece. It's just so expensive here that traditionally the idea was you get people out of their crisis mode and deal with the trauma that they've faced, because that's the one really consistent thing with homeless people. They're very diverse.
Precipitated it, yeah.
Yes, that they have this trauma background, and so you work on that, and then you kind of try to integrate them back into a regular life of budgeting and working, and then they're ready to get into housing, and they go into housing. But we have this bottleneck right there. We have some great services, great programs in the county to get people sort of healed and ready to move forward, and then there's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah. A friend of mine who lives in Osaka, Japan, posted something on Facebook about how the rents in San Francisco and the Bay Area in general are 400 times what he pays in Japan.
That's hard for my mind to even figure the math on that.
Yeah, and it's not like he's living in some slum, you know what I mean?
Yes,
So I don't know if the public agencies we talked about earlier, the government institutions and stuff like that, can fix it, especially since part of their mandate is to bring in the businesses and stuff that in part raise the rents, What are we going to do?
That is really tough. Well, one of the things we're working on is adding more vocational training, and we're working on putting together a restaurant skill vocational training. And we're not talking about training the next great chef, but the bussers and servers and dishwashers, because that industry is growing. There is a lot of money in it. They are paying better wages. So one of the ways we can work on this is to get people so they're making enough income to at least be able to rent a room or get a studio. If the rents keep going up the way they are, the salaries just don't keep up, so that gets pretty difficult. But I think Sonoma County is a unique place. It's a beautiful place, and I think a lot of its citizens realize that to keep it the place that we like, you have to have some diversity, and you have to somehow make room for the workers to live somewhere nearby.
I think people forget that diversity is also an economic issue. It isn't just a cultural issue, it's having people of different backgrounds, economically speaking as well.
Yes.
And that's definitely trending out, it seems. Right?
Yes.
I can't lean on any statistics right now, but I think apocryphally we both can see that it's changing dramatically. And I worry that facilities like your own, like the Day Center for Homeless and Women and Children, the Living Room, will be overwhelmed. Do you fear that?
We don't really fear that, because there are only so many people who can really be handled out on the streets, or who will come. They will find other places to go, but it's expensive to go somewhere else. And just one of the services we provide is bus tickets. And we just the other day had someone whose grandmother said, well, if you can come back here over near Sacramento, I will take care of one of your two kids for you. And it's heartbreaking. Yes, it is. It's terrible, but we provided a Greyhound bus ticket so she could go do that, because she couldn't even afford to do that. And it's tough. I don't think we'll be overrun, because I think there are enough people who really value the quality of life in Sonoma County that they're going to continue to work on the problem. But it is something we have to be vigilant about, because if we don't get the housing situation under control, you won't get the workers, and the whole quality of life starts deteriorating.
I agree. We're with Cheryl Parkinson. She is the executive director of The Living Room, and we'll be right back. And we're back on 707 with Cheryl Parkinson. She's the executive director of The Living Room, which is a day facility for homeless women and children, not a daycare. It's a very different thing.
We have been called that, but we don't call ourselves
I meant
that.
day, comma, care. So, care during the day.
Yes.
This is very challenging work, I would imagine. And I wonder, where do you get the strength and the fortitude to persevere? Is this something you studied?
It is not something I studied. I really love the work, and frankly, I've heard over the years so many times when they talk about people on their deathbed, what do they say? You know, nobody ever says, I wish I had spent more time at work. So I think finding work that you do enjoy is a really important thing, and I am the manager of the facility, but day-to-day work with the women a lot, and I really enjoy it. Just prior to this job, I've been here 4 years.
Right.
I started on April Fool's Day in 2012, which I wasn't so sure about, but it's worked out all right. I was running a mediation center in Hilo. I'm a certified mediator also, so
wow.
I did that for a little while.
Where did you come from originally?
I've lived all over California, but the Bay Area, started out in the Bay Area and went to school there, and then moved to LA. Then I got my undergraduate education at Santa Barbara,
Right on. Yeah.
cultural anthropology BA, and then I went to law school at Santa Clara University. So I've kind of been all over the state.
Did you grow up in a family that was sort of altruistic in nature, like this work would require?
Not so much. We, had a lot of family around, and we're pretty close that way. But
siblings or anything? Or?
Yeah, I have a sister and a little brother. But the idea to be volunteering and do that kind of thing is actually more something I was always drawn to for some reason. I just really enjoy that. I was on the board of the Children's Village when we started that agency, and I've been on some other nonprofit boards before jumping over into the staff kind of position.
I'm always fascinated by what draws people into service like this. What is the impetus? Was it a particular moment, or is it just a calling?
Well, for this particular job, and this is really, the mediation is a lot of serving lower income people. It was mostly court referrals and things, but this to me was just, the need is so there and so vast, and to me it's like, how can I support myself and feel good about what I'm doing? I used to do a lot of volunteer work, and I say be on boards, but still had to have a job. I haven't figured out how to get out of that yet. So to be able to do both is really what I was looking for. And when this opening came up, I thought, that is perfect. Can help women who are really struggling, and use my skills to hopefully make their lives better.
Do you have any mentors that sort of drew you into this, or that you turn to, or have turned to?
Not particularly. I've worked with a lot of really strong women, and a lot of our board members have been around this cause for a long time. Marlene Belaine was our board chair for several years, and Carol Kiner, and some other women who've been around Sonoma County for a long time, and really know their way around the social services and nonprofit worlds. They've really helped me.
You named some board members, all of whom were women.
We also have male board members. Dave Burdo is actually our current chairperson, and Doug Caesar. So we do have a mix on the board.
The reason I ask is that because you serve specifically women, in that population, what are the special needs that they have, and why are you drawn to help women specifically in this case?
Well, I think women have for years really not been appreciated fully. In my lifetime, I was a lawyer for a while and came in when that was kind of rare. I worked with mostly men. The men always got paid more. It was trying to have children and work. It was just assumed you were okay giving up your career, and that sort of thing, that sort of struggle. But also women who are really at the bottom of the ladder as far as being able to help themselves, I'm very drawn to, because I think women are so strong, and these women we serve, a lot of people look at them, oh, these people are weak, they can't take care of themselves. These are some of the strongest women I have ever been able to imagine. I mean, to hand somebody a sleeping bag to go find a place to sleep somewhere in the streets of Santa Rosa, and to be able to maintain, some semblance of sanity in your life and get through day to day is really tough. We have over 90% of the women we serve have been exposed to domestic violence, and that's a huge issue of its own. But these women who have fled domestic violence and are starting with nothing, to me, there really isn't a cause that I'm more drawn to than that, to help these women get back on their feet and really show themselves how strong they are and what they're capable of.
In terms of domestic violence, do they have any other recourse but the streets?
They do. There's a safe house, but it has certain criteria that not all the women meet. Some of them, the domestic violence isn't recent enough for them to qualify, or there's something else that's happened. But there isn't a lot. Generally, the scenario is the man has control of the assets, and she's usually fleeing with nothing. And I don't mean to imply that men aren't subject to domestic violence, because they certainly are. We just don't serve them. Right. So not counting them out. Course, but usually it's been a long time. They make the decision, especially if they have kids. It's tough. They're out there. And most of the women with children are not literally sleeping outside. They might be in cars, they might be doubled up with friends or things like that. But it's a very tough time. It's hard to just maintain what you need to do to eat and sleep and those sorts of things when you're dealing with that trauma.
You see a lot of very tough stories, I'm sure.
Yes.
How do you muster the resilience? How do you not take your work home with you, or do you?
Every once in a while we do, but we really emphasize to our staff, volunteers, and ourselves about self-care, that you really have to work on your own resilience, which the word you use is perfect, because that's what we try to bring to the women. That's the way they can get out of the PTSD and other things that they're suffering from, is resilience. And it's there, just really needs to be nurtured. And same thing for our staff and volunteers. I mean, there are stories that are just take your breath away, and it's hard to even function for the rest of that day. But in the end, we all look back and say, we're helping. Okay, we heard all this stuff and got dumped on, but we're helping, so that makes you feel better. And the whole concept, there is secondary trauma. You can be traumatized just by hearing about someone else's trauma, but we're very aware of that, and we train for it, and hopefully people recognize it. That's sort of our goal. My goal as a manager is to make sure people recognize when they're being triggered by somebody else's story, because we might need to bring someone else in or have them take a break and switch out with someone if that's happening.
We're talking with Cheryl Parkinson. She's the executive director of The Living Room. We'll be right back. And we're back with Cheryl Parkinson. She's the executive director of The Living Room, a day facility for homeless women and children. We talked a lot about how your core clientele, women, oftentimes have children. And in this scenario, how do the children perceive, at least in your perception, their circumstances? Do they understand what's happening?
It depends on the ages. We deal mostly with preschoolers, and that's sort of a logistical thing because we're open during school hours. But Most of the kids have trauma backgrounds also, and the ones we deal with are so young, they may not remember the difference so much of what they're doing, but they do understand being different. And that's something that we work very hard on and try to educate other people about. Is these kids want what every other kid wants. Homeless people are people. They're just like the rest of us. I actually spoke to a kindergarten class last year, and they had different questions. And they asked, well, what do they like? What do these kids like? Because they were going to go gather some donations. I said, well, what would you like? And they seemed really surprised. It's like, they like what you like. You want Spider-Man underwear, they want Spider-Man underwear.
Right.
That's,
so do I.
Yeah, comes in all sizes. So, and we talked some about the fact, one of the differences, they can't have big stuff because they have no place to put it. They don't have a closet in their room with a toy chest. They might have a backpack, and they need something that fits in the backpack. And that's really the difference for them. But they do see, they see their mom maybe being told by the mall security that they're not welcome in there, they've been there too much, or somebody saying, you need to move along, you can't hang out here.
Do you think kids are inherently more resilient than grown-ups?
In general, I think so, if they're treated right. I don't know if you're familiar with the ACEs study. It's over 20 years old now, but it was a Kaiser study that was done of Kaiser patients. So this was not a homeless study, but they found out that there are several factors that kind of determine how someone deals with the rest of their life. And the ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And so what they, in a nutshell, found is if you have multiple adverse experiences, the likelihood is you're going to be struggling with some kind of PTSD or something else later in life. But the real key is resilience that we talked about before. And resilience can be built through family support, just self-esteem, self-care, those sorts of things. It can be help from the outside and the inside. Some people, just personality-wise and all, are a little more resilient than others. But for the kids, some of the factors are having a parent in jail, being in a violent situation or ongoing abuse or neglect, having a parent who's mentally ill. Those are all kind of very basic adverse childhood experiences. And how the toddlers we see, some you'd think, well, nothing really bad could have happened to them yet. Well, yes, for a lot of them it has. It's been perhaps a really violent household, or they might have their dad might have been incarcerated or deported, one day is just gone, that sort of thing. So some of these little guys really have had some considerable trauma.
Can resilience be learned? And is that something you try to teach?
It can be learned, and that's really the great hope of having the kids so young, is having the positive discipline where they feel good about themselves, they start trusting adults, they know there are people there who will help them, getting regular meals, not being hungry. Being hungry is pretty traumatic also, and some of these kids, go for a while without eating. We see kids who have eating disorders because they're always being forced to eat whenever the food happens to be available.
Right.
So it's not necessarily when they're hungry. It's like, George, you have to eat this right now because this is when the meal is being served and I don't know when the next one's coming. And you can imagine the anxiety of having to eat under those circumstances is tough. So they have all sorts of challenges, but the smiles and the fun. We pulled out the little baby pools the other day when it was 90 degrees or something, and just that simple act of being able to splash around in the water like any other kid would do is really freeing for them.
Not to sound glib, but if I were to give you a magic wand and you could fix one problem in Santa Rosa, perhaps a problem that precipitates the issues that you see at the living room, what would you do? What is that problem? What would you do about it?
I think building a whole bunch of affordable housing would be it. I think that would solve so many issues, not just for the people we deal with, but everyone who's working and on limited means. My staff has trouble finding an affordable place to live. I've run into renting where there are 30 people putting an application in, and so I think it's something. The space is here, the money is here. It's really the will. Is it enough of a priority? And I think people would just really get a multiple of that investment by seeing how much good it did for the community to have people housed in affordable housing.
I know there's a controversy in Sonoma right now, sort of a not in my backyard situation, where there's a proposed affordable housing project that the neighborhood that it's proposed to be in, many people apparently don't want it there. How do we face those issues as a community? How as a community, do we make a positive contribution and get over ourselves and our BS?
I think a lot of it is education, not in the formal sense, but for instance, one of the biggest challenges we run into is people thinking that homeless are different. They're different, but they are, your neighbors, your relatives. These are most of the people we see lived in Sonoma County before they became homeless. And we have people who had full careers, 40 years as a teacher or nurse, something else, and then they get a disability and they're in their car. I think if people realize these are just like us, that there wouldn't be so much of I don't want them near me. I don't want them living in my neighborhood. But the homeless ladies we serve are, you would not know they're homeless if they had the means to take care of themselves. And, they're really a great asset for the community. So I think a big part of it is that if you don't have the mental health services, you're going to have people with mental illness who are tough to deal with on the street. Right. That is another piece that needs to be dealt with. But for the more general population, having affordable housing and services, these people would be additions to the community. They enrich the community, they work hard. And I think that's really the problem. People don't want them in their backyard because they think there's some other, kind of species almost. And if we could get past that stigma, that would be really helpful.
Cheryl Parkinson, thank you for being on. Tell us where we can find the living room.
The living room is at 1207 Cleveland Avenue, and our phone number is 579-0138. We have a pretty active website at www.thelivingroomsc, as in SonomaCounty.org. And we are on Facebook, so if you want to see what we've been up to, check us out on Facebook.
Cheryl Parkinson is the Executive Director of The Living Room. Thank you so much for being on. I hope you come back.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.